So before I get to watch the doubleheader of the League Cup, and yes, I am actually going to be watching the League Cup this season, and I'm actually going to try to kind of care about the League Cup, even though I still feel like it is a bit of a cash cow, and that the only reason why I'm starting to kind of care about the competition is the fact that at least there's something that is at stake besides the trophy, and that of course is the CONCACAF Champions League, and whoever wins the League Cup will be getting a CONCACAF Champions League in the future. But for today, we are going to do an emotion index because we have just hit the halfway point of the MLS season, and I thought this would be an appropriate time for me to kind of look at how each team feel after the first half of the season is over. Are they in a stage where they're just doing so well so far this season they can't wait until the playoffs begin? Or are they going to be kind of like, yeah, things are definitely looking great. We're in a comfortable spot right now to potentially make it to the playoffs. Or are they kind of like, meh, it could be better. It could be worse. Or are they just kind of like in a very rough patch right now? Or they're in some teams where maybe even though they have gone through a very rough patch, at least there are light at the end of the tunnel, and there's some hope after a bad run they've been going through. And then in the fifth tier, as you know, it is the panic tier. It is when teams are definitely panicking. Or there might be teams that maybe are not panicking and realize that, yeah, they're not going to make the playoffs. So it's pretty much see you next season mode. And what I'm also going to do in this emotion index is that I'm actually going to go in order in terms of this emotion index. I mean, the last couple of ones I have been kind of gone with a random order. But this time, I am actually going to go in order. And we start off with Atlanta United, and by the way, in order meaning that I'm going to go alphabetically. So we'll start with Atlanta United, who I'm going to say they're going to be right here. And there's a reason why this is very important for me to write down in this fourth tier, because, even though these teams are in the situation that they are in this tier where they're in a rough patch, at least there's some light at the end of the tunnel, and there's hope that they can get themselves back into playoff contention and rise up in this emotion index tier. And Atlanta United is definitely one of those teams where I think their fans, after seeing their team finally end the longest winless run in franchise history by winning 3-2 against Columbus, and especially playing very well and looked like almost the Atlanta United of the old on the attacking end. Yeah, there's definitely some hope to this team, and not to mention the fact that that game they also did not have Joseph Martinez, and if Joseph Martinez is going to be back, which he should be back after getting suspended in the last game against Columbus because of getting a red card against Montreal, and if their new signing Luis Araujo from Leo turns out to be an absolute superstar, and turns out to be a guy that not only helps Joseph Martinez in terms of take some pressure off of scoring goals, but also could be a lethal goal scorer, this Atlanta team can definitely make a second half resurgence and get themselves back to the place where they were expecting heading into this season, which is considered to be a playoff team and maybe a playoff contender in the Eastern Conference. Now, moving on, in terms of the next one is Austin FC. And for Austin, yeah, they're kind of right here. But they're not in the time to panic tier, but more like it's kind of like see you next season tier, where, this is a team where I just feel like this team maybe don't have enough in terms of making the playoffs this year, which is no shame to Austin FC, because a lot of expansion team in the past have always get to this point where they just maybe don't have enough to make it to the playoffs in their first ever year. And I know this might sound disappointed for Austin FC, knowing what has happened in these past couple of expansion team, where it just feels like almost every single expansion team are able to make the playoffs in their very first year, when in reality that is not the case. But the only thing I will also say with Austin, and maybe I could kind of move them into this tier where maybe there could be some still glimmers of hope that they could be a playoff contender, is the fact that, in MLS, we know that if you can out of nowhere make a good run, you can definitely get yourself back into a playoff contention if you're sitting near the bottom of the table. And also, if their new signing, Sebastian Jurizzi, is going to be that final piece of puzzle that they're missing. Because I still think when you look at this team, the final piece of puzzle is that number 9 position. And like I said, if Jurizzi is going to be the guy that is going to be the goal scorer of this team, there's no doubt that Austin does still have a chance to potentially be a playoff team. But if Jurizzi is not that guy, and they continue to be in this inconsistent form that they've been in, and also been struggling to score goals, yeah, I just feel like it's kind of like see you next season mode, and maybe heading into the off season they're going to continue to search deep to find a number 9 that can definitely score the goals for this team. Now moving on to the Chicago Fire, and for the Fire, if you're a Fire fan, I get that you could be in this stage where it's kind of like see you next season, because you know how this story ends with the way how I talked about they've been very inconsistent, and in some way they're back to their inconsistent form, where after a bit of a dip in form they did able to go on a little bit of a mini 2-game unbeaten run, and I think Fire fans know what's going to come next, which is they're probably going to lose the next game, and then they'll probably win another one, and it's just this endless cycle of inconsistency. But that being said, I still put them here in the 4th tier because, with how the East is right now, and maybe, if just maybe, the Chicago Fire can go into that good run that they had in June in the second half of the season, they can definitely get themselves out of trouble in the Eastern Conference. And I really feel like this season, if you're in the Eastern Conference and you're near the bottom of the table, it's actually much easier for you to go on a bit of an unbeaten run and all of a sudden get above the red line compared to the Western Conference. Because I know this season in the Western Conference, there's actually been some teams that have been on a good run near the bottom of the table, but they just tends to struggle to get out of it because teams above them are able to win games. That's not the case in the East. I mean, it seems like teams that is kind of like right near that playoff line tends to always drop points, which means it always gets a chance for some of these teams that is near the bottom have a chance to get themselves climb out of the bottom and go on a good run, and all of a sudden they're now above the red line in the Eastern Conference. But now moving on to the next team, which is FC Cincinnati. And, for FC Cincinnati, I'm gonna also put them in the same situation that Chicago is in right now, where, for Cincinnati, yes, it's been a really bad run for them ever since they did have that glimmer of hope back in June, that when they were doing well on the road and they were getting points. Maybe this is a Cincinnati team that can maybe make a run for the playoffs. But, these last 6 games have really kind of dashed that hope, the fact that they've gone winless doing all 6 of these games. But I think, as I said in the beginning of the season, playoffs is definitely not a goal that FC Cincinnati is going to reach just yet. I mean, right now, the goal for FC Cincinnati, as I said in the beginning of the season, is to at least be respectful. And I really feel like this season they have at least been respectful. I mean, they did start off the season terribly, and yes, there has also been some painful moments that FC Cincinnati has to suffer, including blowing multiple 2-goals lead and also giving up late goals to the end of the game. But at least they're not like that team that is just regularly going to be a team that is the laughing stock and kind of a team that is just going to be easy free point for the other team. And that's what FC Cincinnati need to kind of continue this season, where even if they're not going to make it the playoffs, the goal is don't finish dead last in the East. At least finish somewhere where higher than that spot, because really with this team, how bad they've been in the first 2 seasons, the old saying goes, there's really nowhere to go but up. And right now this team, at least even with those painful moments that they suffer over this season, they have actually played much better and have done much better compared to their first 2 seasons, which was just, again, a dumpster fire for this team. But now moving on to the Colorado Rapids, and after putting a lot of team near the bottom, finally I get to put a team that is here at the top, where the Rapids definitely having a great season, and I think their fans are definitely going to be happy with the way that they are sitting in 4th place in the Western Conference, and maybe could challenge in terms of the top 3, where in the West, when you look at the standings, the top part of the table, it's actually very tight. I mean, there seems to be a freeway battle right now in first place between the Galaxy and the Sounders and SKC, because there's only 2 points between them. But I think the Rapids are also pretty close in terms of that spot. Now, that being said, they could have helped themselves if they would have beat SKC in the last game and maybe gained ground on the leader, or gain ground on the leader right now in the Western Conference, but they weren't able to do so. But still, the Rapids, it's been an incredible season that they've been going through right now, and let's see if they can, of course, continue for the rest of the year. Now, moving on to the Columbus Crew, and unfortunately, I have to go back to here. I mean, I go alphabetical order, and turns out all the teams that I start with alphabetical order always tends up to be near the bottom of the list. But yeah, for Columbus, there are definitely signs that their fans might have time to panic. Now, yes, they are still suffering some key injury to their team. And those injuries, if you, of course, have those guys in their squad, there's no doubt the Crew will not be as bad as they have been. But what is very concerning with this team is the fact that they have now only, I think, won 2 games out of their last 8. And the fact that they're starting to get healthy and now started to have another issue where the defense all of a sudden started to just leak goals left and right. Like this last 3 games, I have no idea what's going on with this Crew defense and why it all of a sudden just kind of becoming a defense that is becoming the worst defense in these last 3 game stretch. Like they give up 11 goals in the last 3 games. Something, if this was the Crew from earlier this season or even last season, that would maybe take like 10 or 11 games to happen. But to have 3 games where they have conceded 11 goals and have regularly conceded 3 goals, and not just on the road but at home nevertheless. Yeah, this is definitely a very concerning sign if you're the Columbus Crew, and the only way you can maybe stop that bleeding is maybe get themselves back to winning ways and hope those players that is on the IR list can come off of it as soon as possible. But there is no doubt the Crew, this has been a very disappointing season for them and for a team that a lot of people predicted that they were the Supporters' Shield winner, and even a lot of people say even if they do go for an injury crisis, they're such a deep team that they should be able to still do well even if they do go for an injury crisis. And it seems like now maybe we underestimated that, and maybe the fact that despite they add a lot of depth into this team, yeah, it hasn't really worked out so far, and at least most of the players that they have added for depth has just been a huge disappointment for this team so far. But now moving on to the next team, and that's DC United. And again, finally get a chance to go back up near the top, because it's been rare for me to put teams at the top part of the Emotion Index. And that, of course is the case for DC, where their fans must be very happy with how this team has been playing. Like they've been in a very good run of form. And really, I think maybe the only thing that might be concerned if you're a DC fans is that team still struggle to put away chances, and at times do have a problem in terms of finishing really good chances. But the fact that they're actually produced chances and actually playing some good soccer under Lasada, something that would never happen if they were still under Benny Olsen, is a very encouraging sign if you're a DC fan. And it's no surprise that with a good run that they've been on lately, they've now got themselves where they were spending most of the time near the bottom of the Eastern Conference to now get themselves above the red line and rise themselves into 6th place in the Eastern Conference. But now moving on to FC Dallas. And for Dallas, there's no doubt they're going to be right here. And if I would have done this Emotion Index a couple of weeks ago, and also remember a couple of weeks ago where I put Dallas right around here, where it's kind of almost like see you next season mode, because it seems like there's just no hope with this team. All of a sudden, they decided to go on a crazy run where I think they have like won 3 out of their last 4 games, and have not only done that, but also beaten some of the best team in the league and able to get points against some of the best team in the league. Dallas is back into this. I mean, again, and I think Dallas is also a good example of the fact that it doesn't really take much for you to really get yourself back into the playoff race. And, a lot of that has to do with the fact that they can actually win on the road for once. And also the revelation of Ricardo Pepi, who has really just provided a huge spark to this team, especially on the attacking end. Now, I'm not quite sure if he can continue to keep up the pace that he is, and if he does, then there is no doubt that there's going to be a lot of teams in Europe starting to call FC Dallas, and there's no doubt that Pepi could also be the next big American that could potentially make the jump to Europe. But as of now, his revelation and Dallas playing much better compared to the beginning of the season have now got them on the cusp of potentially getting themselves above the red line, which is something I did not expect a couple of weeks ago when it definitely looked like it was doom and gloom for this team. But now moving on to the Houston Dynamo, and unfortunately that cannot be said to their interstate rival, the Houston Dynamo, where it definitely kind of looks like dooming and gloom. And yes, even though they are not that far away from a playoff picture, they're kind of like in that group where in the West it seems like there is a very tight gap between 6th through 11th place right now, but the Dynamo is heading the wrong direction in terms of trying to be a playoff contender. Like, they have now had the longest winless run in MLS after Atlanta was able to snap them, and unless if they can do that something that Atlanta did this past weekend, this team is taking a huge nosedive, and just almost kind of a replica of what happened in 2019, where this team got off to such a good start and people were thinking that this team might actually do something and maybe for Rio, and then yeah, it kind of took a nosedive, and if it kind of continues to do so, the Dynamo are really kind of in that see you next season mode, and maybe are truly thinking about a time where they are actually going to rebuild. Because when you look at this squad, I talked about how the Dynamo should think about rebuilding, but when you look at this team, it doesn't feel like that's what they're trying to do. They keep trying to retool and trying to hope that it will work out for them to get themselves above the red line, but it just doesn't feel like that works with the way that the talent gap of this team still is nowhere near as good as the teams that is currently above the red line and a team that could potentially make the playoffs. But now moving on to the LA Galaxy, and for the Galaxy, they're going to be here. So I talked about the Galaxy been in a relatively rough patch for the past couple of games. Well, despite that, somehow in some way they're still in 3rd place. Like, it's kind of amazing the fact that they've been in a rough patch and also not having their best goal scorer in Chicharito, and they're still in 3rd place, and they're actually only 2 points from being in first place in the Western Conference. Like, that's just how sometimes MLS work, where it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But hey, if you're a Galaxy fan, you probably are very happy about that, although I'm pretty sure they're going to be frustrated the fact that they could have maybe take that top spot in the Western Conference, or at least tie with SKC if they would have beat the Vancouver Whitecaps this past weekend. But at least the fact that they're done with Vancouver for the rest of the season, and that they don't have to worry about them, which is kind of like one of their biggest nemesis so far in these past couple of years. Now they can focus on maybe potentially winning against the other team, and maybe even push their way to the top part of the Western Conference. Like, for the Galaxy this season, what's interesting about this team is that they definitely are able to get job done when they were able to beat against teams that they're able to beat, except for Vancouver, that is. But when it comes to when they do play against those good teams, that's when they do kind of have those issues. And in some way, they're kind of having the issue where I've also said the same case with their intercity rival LAFC. But that being said, speaking of LAFC, they are now right down here, where, yeah, I mean, there's definitely got to be a lot of concern if you're an LAFC fan, and especially with the way that there's really no excuses to say, how in the world is this team right now just above the red line, and how in the world, with just so much talent on this team, and maybe even having 2 of the best players in Carlos Vela and Diego Rossi, and yet they're still just above the red line right now. And it's kind of mind-boggling, but at the same time, there's kind of a combination of the reason why LAFC is not doing well. One, obviously, as I mentioned many times, they just cannot play again. They are not able to get wins against teams that is above the red line. And 2, they're also starting to drop points against teams that they started to win. And 3, their finishing and their attack has looked nothing like they were when they came into the league, where it just kind of stuttered and just hasn't looked the same as we have seen before. And then the 4th reason might have to do with maybe teams have started to figure out LAFC a little bit, and in some way, Bob Bradley just having no answer in terms of responding some of the ways that teams have played against LAFC. And I've said this before, where when you're a team and you've been so good for a bit, and when teams have started to figure you out, you need to find a way to try to adapt and try to change your tactics so you can remain great. And at least for LAFC, they have not done a good job of that. And despite the fact that they have just so much talent on their team, it's just kind of an example of this team clearly underachieving. Those that they're having a very underachieving kind of season. But now moving on to Inter Miami. For Miami, even though they're kind of like in the mirror, kind of part of the emotion index, I think their fans are probably going to feel like they're going to be right here, where, consider what happened in that 6-game losing streak, where they were in this doom and gloom stage where it's pretty much see you next season, and that we're actually more likely to gun for the wooden spoon than actually make the playoffs. All of a sudden, these last 3 games, or these last 4 games, were they able to get draws against their interstate rival Orlando City, and then get wins against Nashville SC, and also getting another win against Montreal, and all of a sudden they're back in that discussion of potentially could get themselves in the Eastern Conference play contention and into the bubble. And I as I said before, it doesn't take much for you to get yourself back into this conversation, and at least right now Miami is doing a great job in terms of keep themselves in that conversation. And even though doing this 4-game unbeaten run, they haven't been anything special, and in some way, like the soccer that they've been playing for the most part has been ugly, but they have at least find a way to always get all 3 points at the end of the game, and that's something that I've not seen this Miami team done, not just this season, but also in previous season, where they always tends to have that problem with also being consistent and always able to have that crucial moment to score late goals to get all 3 points at the end of the game. Now, moving on to Minnesota, and for the Loons, where I'm going to put them. They're definitely right here where things are just going so great for the Loons that it's almost getting into territory where I wish the playoffs have started right now for the Loons. Because right now, if the playoffs would have started, this is one of the hottest teams right now in the Western Conference. And I'm pretty sure no one wants to play Minnesota right now in the Western Conference, even if they're right now down in 6th place in the Western Conference, which if the playoffs would have started, they would have played against the Galaxy. And I would definitely bet that, they could beat the Galaxy, even it's on the road, and especially if there's going to be no Chicharito for the Galaxy for that game. But yeah, this team, I've said it before, ever since they started 0-4 in the beginning of the season, when there was a lot of doomers saying that this season looks like it's going to be a huge underachieve, all of a sudden they have now gone unbeaten in their last 12 out of 13 games, and their record in their last 12 games ever since they gone on that 0-4 start is 7-1-5. Like, nobody has got that great in terms of the last 12 games. Actually, maybe I think New England is the only team that have had that incredible stretch of run. But yeah, there's no doubt the Loons have definitely been on fire, and they continue to continue this incredible run that they had. It's not going to be very long before they are knocking on the door to potentially rise themselves near the top part of the Western Conference table. But moving on to Montreal, and for Montreal, yeah, they're going to be right here, and they're the definition of being in a rough patch, and that, yeah, things are starting to fall apart a little bit for this team, where after an incredible month of June, where they get themselves actually near the top 4 of the Eastern Conference, they've now gone winless in 6 games and have not got a win ever since that incredible 5-4 victory against FC Cincinnati, and now once again they find themselves below the red line again. And unless if Montreal can pick themselves up, and Wilfred Nancy team can have that incredible month like they did had in June, it seems like it could be the same story again for this Montreal team, where they have a good start to the season and then things kind of fall apart as the season goes along. But now moving on to Nashville. So for Nashville, I think their fans could still agree that things are looking great, but this second half of the season, I think if there's any team that in this second half of the season can really tell us the story of whether or not indeed if they have enough to get themselves hold on to that playoff spot or fall down below the red line, Nashville is definitely one of these teams. Because as I mentioned before, Nashville, they had a very heavy home start to the first half of the season, which means that they're going to have a lot of road games in the second half of the season. And I believe this is also, I think they've been on the road for the last 2 games, and they're currently on a relatively long road stretch coming through, and with them having so many road games and so few home games, this will really test Nashville and really just kind of show whether or not the good run that they've been on right now was because of the fact that they have a lot of games at home, or the fact that they're actually a decent team. I mean, right now when you look at the record, they're still a very decent team. I mean, they only lost 2 games so far this season, and that's even after they suffered their second loss against Inter Miami this past weekend. And so far, no other team has lost no less than 3 games so far this year. But if this team aren't able to find a way to get wins on the road, which is something they have not done so far this season, despite the fact that they've been relatively decent so far this season on the road, picking up a lot of draws and only lost 2 games so far on the road. It's great to pick up draws on the road, but at the same time, because they also have dropped a lot of points so far at home this season, they need to start maybe winning some games so that they can, of course, stay above the red line. I mean, right now they're only 5 points above the red line, which might sound like a big cushion, but it really isn't, especially we still have 17 games to play, and especially the fact that there are teams around them that have really started to pick up form and can really easily pass them if Nashville started to go for a rough patch on this heavy road end to their season. Now, moving on to New England. Yeah, for New England, they're right here, and there's really not much explanation I have to say about New England, where, I mean, they not only can't wait for the playoffs, but I really think they can't wait to potentially celebrate another silverware and winning the Supporters' Shield, because right now they are in probably the best position to win the Supporters' Shield out of any team. Like, in fact, they're kind of running away with not only the Eastern Conference title, with them having a 10-point gap over Orlando City, but they're also running away in terms of the Supporters' Shield standing, open a 7-point gap over Sporting KC, and with them keep winning every single week, I won't be surprised they would get to that point where they could actually win the Supporters' Shield. And also, if this pace keeps up for New England, where since they're now at 40 points through 17 games, they can keep this pace. They can actually break the record for the most point that any MLS team has ever got in the regular season, because I believe LAFC currently holds that title, and LAFC, I think they got like 76 points during their second year, and that was also the year when LAFC, of course, won the Supporters' Shield. Now, moving on to the New York Red Bulls, and for the Red Bulls, yeah, they are definitely in a rough patch where they're now winless in the last 5 games, and remember that time when they were doing so well at home and they were able to get themselves above the red line? Well, because of the fact that they're now on this winless run and now stop winning at home and also continue to drop points on the road, it's no surprise the Red Bulls are going through this rough patch and really got themselves now below the red line. And they hope that maybe that home form is starting to come good again for them, but really, with the way that their home form in the last couple of games started to struggle a little bit, this is really a team where they need to maybe start picking up some road points, or even getting some road wins too, because as I said with MLS, and kind of the easy way to get to the playoffs is win your home games and also get points on the road. But when you don't win your home games, you can really start to find yourself in a deficit, and then you drop points at home, and you have to kind of make up that deficit by maybe winning some game on the road, and that's just something that the Red Bulls have not been able to do so far this season. But now moving on to NYCFC, their inter-city rival. For NYCFC, they're definitely here, and they have been on a red-hot form, and I'm pretty sure NYCFC fans would be happy with the way that this team has played. In fact, they can continue this red-hot form. They can actually overtake Orlando City and get into that second spot. But as I said, they have been red hot lately. Yes, they did drew 2-2 against TFC, but prior to that, they were like winning 4 or 5-0 on a regular pace, and almost looked like the NYCFC team that finished first in the Eastern Conference not too long after, and they're starting to slowly look like that NYCFC team that could actually make a playoffs and maybe, just maybe, make a run into the playoffs. I mean, I'm pretty sure for NYCFC fans, as happy as they are right now in a good position in the playoffs, when you ask an NYCFC fans, all they care right now is that when they get to the playoffs, it's just, are they actually going to move past the second round and actually not suffer a playoff fatality? And if the answer is no, then yeah, it doesn't really matter where they finish in the standings, and it just kind of also feel like this is a team where playoffs doesn't really matter and regular season doesn't matter. It's about getting to the playoffs, and that will really determine when the season, of course, would determine whether they have a successful season or not. But now moving on to Orlando City. So for Orlando, things are still great for them. They're still second in the Eastern Conference, but there's no doubt that there are a couple of teams behind them that is starting to catch them up. And, Orlando hasn't really been in a good form lately. They also at times have been inconsistent in these last couple of games, and also because of that, they lost a lot of ground on New England, and it also kind of allowed the Revs to open up such a big gap in the Eastern Conference standings between first and second. But that being said, as long as Orlando is in second place, I can't really put them below the mad line. And when you're in second place in the Eastern Conference, it doesn't really matter if you're a small gap toward these next couple of teams or a big gap toward these next couple of teams. You're definitely very happy because you're in a very good position, barring any late season collapse, that Orlando City should be able to make the playoffs and are also in a good position of at least hosting one or even two games this season at home for the playoffs. Now, moving on, we got the Philadelphia Union, and I'm going to also put the Union in the same spot as Orlando City. And in some way, again, for the Union, yes, they are starting to fall below the standings a little bit, and they also been through a rough patch, but they haven't really lost as much ground and lost a lot of places as I thought it would be, even with the rough patch that they've been going through. Now, what is also going to be interesting about this Union team is because they're the only team that is still in the CONCACAF Champions League in MLS, and depending on if they do go deep into this competition, yeah, it's going to be a tough choice for this Union team of how are they going to balance this, because in some way they don't want to just say that, we're just going to punt some games away in MLS and just focus on the CONCACAF Champions League. And this is also kind of the one thing that maybe this year in CCL, this is some things that could be a negative for some MLS team, because as much as I know the positive for CCL this season with it being spread out and how MLS team finally get a chance to play against Liga MX's team that might be still in early season form, but the problem with that is that with it happened in mid-season, and if the Union is in a place where they are either fighting for their playoffs or maybe going for a rough patch and need to have a couple of wins to get themselves back up to the Eastern Conference table, but you also have the CONCACAF Champions League going, like, which do you focus more? Like, if you focus on CCL and you start putting some of those game away, you can definitely find yourself below the red line. But then if you decide to focus on MLS and not focus on CCL, you basically just let down the whole league, and basically just another kind of year where MLS team once again aren't able to overcome the mountain of CCL. So yeah, this is an interesting choice for the Union to have, and I do feel sorry for their fans that they have to choose that option. And in some way, it could maybe also be a no-win situation, because let's say if the Union do punt some of these games away for the last couple of games, and they do lose against Copa America in the CONCACAF Champions League, then they just basically punt those games away for absolutely nothing, and it can definitely harm their chances in terms of getting home field advantage heading into the playoffs. But now moving on to the Portland Timbers, and for the Timbers, yeah, it's kind of a mess situation for them where they're just they've been kind of up and down in terms of the red line right now, and a lot of that has to do with the inconsistent form that the Timbers has been having, and also with injuries that they're still having, although they're starting to get a little bit more healthy as we speak of. And for this team, because of that, there's no doubt that Timbers fans are expecting that this team to do much better than they currently are right now, because the team that they currently have right now, it is still just way too inconsistent and still not at that level that they hope that this team could be, where maybe this could be the last chance where they could actually make an MLS Cup run with some of their main core that is in their squad right now. But now moving on to RSL, and for RSL, they're going to be kind of like in this situation where it's kind of meh for them too, where they're unfortunately now dropped out of the playoff position, which I don't think RSL fans really mind that much, because I think this season, if they do make it to the playoffs, then it's a huge success, consider the the question that they had coming in this year, and there's still a big question of who exactly is the owner of this team. But at least some of the signings that they made this offseason has really paid off to this team, and at least get themselves into a playoff kind of contention. But that being said, when you look at these last couple of games, these last couple of games has not really give RSL fans confidence that this team could be a playoff contender, because they've been going through a little bit of a rough patch and haven't been able to win games on a regular basis where they can keep themselves above the red line, and hence that's why they have now dropped themselves below the red line. Now moving on to the San Jose Earthquakes, and I'm gonna say they're here, and I'm kind of being a little bit mad. I could have easily put them right here, where for me it still kind of feel like it's a mess situation with the Quakes, even though I know they're on a 7-game unbeaten run and they're definitely making some ground in the playoff race, and if they can win these next couple of games, and depending on what other team around them do, they can definitely get themselves above the red line. But the reason why I'm still kind of in that mess situation is because unless if this team continue to go on this unbeaten run, and unless if there's a clear sign that there's no stopping this Quakes team to really rise themselves to the table and can be a really threatening team, and maybe even a dark horse team heading into the playoffs, I do worry that the drop-off could potentially happen. Like, this has happened before, where anytime, I've always said, anytime you have some hope with this team, they would immediately let you down. And I've also talked about many times that I'm not falling for this trap. That I am not falling that just because they're doing well right now, all of a sudden things are going to, of course, be well. And you can say I'm being pessimistic or whatsoever. I'm just taking a viewpoint where I think things might could potentially turn to the worst, and it just also feels too good to be true that the Quakes can continue this good run. Now, that being said, I also want them to prove me wrong, and if they do prove me wrong, then, I won't mind whatsoever, because this would be the first time that of course happened. But, for me, for the Quakes, the best way I can say it, and really the most positive way I can say it, is it's a wait-and-see situation. If they can continue this good run that they had, then maybe, just maybe, I'll start believing that this is not actually a fluke, and that they are actually started to build something special as we get into the second half of the season. But now moving on to the Seattle Sounders. Now, I know Sounders fans will say they should be here, because I know they have definitely gone through probably the first rough patch of the season, and I'm kind of having the same issue that pretty much 27 other MLS teams have to face at least once this season, which is not really in a good run. But I'm still going to say they're here, and the reason why I say that they're still here is because they didn't really lose a lot of ground in terms of these last 4 games, despite of them losing 3 out of their 4 games and only won 1 out of them, because since they built up such a good lead in that 13-game unbeaten run, they can afford to go through a bad run, and they're just still right into this race to potentially claim themselves right back at the top of the Western Conference. Now, this bad run, unfortunately, did take a huge damage in terms of their supportership hope, because right now it seems like New England really took advantage of Seattle, who for majority of the year was leading the Supporters' Shield race, but then ever since they struggled, New England really took advantage of it. But really, I think if you're a Sounders fan, I don't think Supporters' Shield is something that they were intended for this team to do. I mean, for their intention, they always want this team to win MLS Cup. And after all, winning MLS Cup, I think everyone can agree that it feels much better than winning the Supporters' Shield. So, yeah, for this team, again, even with the rough patch that they have right now, at least they're going through it right now instead of maybe during playoff time. Because if they are in this kind of form heading into playoff time, then yeah, I think Sounders fan has every right to feel panicking right now and feel like it could be first round exit for this team, something that they have not felt for a very long time. But I have no doubt that once those injuries that they've been having on this team is going to be gone by the end of the season, and also them started to get themselves back into a good form, I don't think this team is going to be a team that could really fall down the table and go through a downward spiral. Like, I've seen before where the Sounders could have gone through a rough patch, and they always find a way to dig themselves out. And as I said in the beginning of the season, if there's one thing that I learned about the Sounders is that you just simply cannot count them out. Even in a rough patch you cannot just say that their season is going for a downward spiral, because they always find a way to get themselves back on track. And if they can do so, they can definitely reclaim that top spot in the Western Conference and could really get back to that stage where it's almost felt like it's their MLS Cup to lose, for what we saw in that 13-game unbeaten run to start the season. But now moving on to Sporting KC. And for SKC, of course, they're going to be right next to where New England is, because, anytime when you are leading your conference, you're always going to be at the very top, just like the standing-wise. And, right now, as I said, if there is one team that can really be up to the challenge against the Sounders, it's going to be Sporting KC. Now, they have proven it once by beating the Sounders on the road, albeit the Sounders were not in full strength. But that goes the same with Sporting KC too, which is also the reason why the next time when they face off against each other at Children Mercy Park, that is a very good measuring stick and could really be a preview of the Western Conference final of how both of these teams is going to do in the playoffs. But there's no doubt that this team is considered a MLS Cup contender, and could really be a team that on their best of the day could really beat anybody, and even maybe could beat New England and heading if they do meet each other in MLS Cup. But now moving on into the last two teams, which is the last two teams, of course, are the Canadian team, and we start off with TFC. And for TFC, they're here. So for TFC, I would say that there is light at the end of the tunnel after a bad run that they've been having, and after the damage that Chris Armas has done to this team. But when you look at the form that they've been in right now, it still is not inspiring me to say that they can get themselves back to a playoff contention. Sure, yes, the losing that they've been having has started to stop, and the bleeding kind of have started to stop with this team. But there's still something that is missing in this team where, they still have a lot of their star player that, are just started to slowly getting back into this team. Pozuelo started to slowly getting back into this team, and if he can be like the Pozuelo like we saw in that game against NYCFC, then there's no doubt that there's a chance that TFC can dig themselves out of a bit of a hole that they dig themselves in the first half of the season. But that being said, again, when you look at their recent form, it is still not good enough if they want to make an incredible second half resurgence and get themselves into playoff contention. Because if you keep drawing games and other team that is above you able to win games, you actually still lose ground against those team. And oh, by the way, did I mention the fact that they're now back down at the bottom of the Eastern Conference? Yeah, it just feels like this is the thing that, for TFC, if they can maybe get or before I say that, it just feels like maybe they haven't really made as much progress as some people have said to be. But if they do get some of their star player back, and if they are going to start winning game anytime soon, then maybe there is still a light at the end of the tunnel, and a glimmer light at the end of the tunnel that they can make this second half resurgent and get themselves back up the Eastern Conference table. But that being said, moving on into the last team, and that, of course, is the Vancouver Whitecaps. And for the Whitecaps, I don't want to say it's kind of see you next season mode and also kind of time to panic mode, but I think the only way that it keeps them not at that mode is because they have drawn 4 straight time, which they kind of in that same situation that the Quakes were in, where they drew 4 straight time, where they kind of stopped the bleeding in terms of losing almost every single week, but they're also not winning games, and that's what the Whitecaps are having problem with. And as much as it's great to finally stop the bleeding, you got to also start winning games, and as long as the Whitecaps don't do so, then this is definitely a concern, and that it is also getting to that point where it could be see you next season if they don't pick things up. And it will also kind of be a disappointing season for the Vancouver Whitecaps too, because this was a season where expectation was a little bit higher, knowing the fact that this is the 3rd year of this deep rebuild, and they don't want to see no progress made like what happened in the first year of their deep rebuild. But another thing I will say, maybe I put them a little bit higher, and maybe there is some light at the end of the tunnel, is that they finally got their number 10 and I forgot what was his first name, but his last name is Gold. And after that game that Elliot the Galaxy and the Whitecaps play, I thought he played play relatively well, and he was very unlucky to not get his first ever goal. That could have been a goal that won the game for the Vancouver Whitecaps against the Galaxy. But there you have it. That is pretty much it for the Emotion Index for all 2017. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this Emotion Index? And as always, if I put your team a little bit too high or too low in the Emotion Index, let me know in the comments below. And also, if you're a fan of one of these teams, let me know where you put your team in the Emotion Index. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.